Welcome to the Speculations reading series, a co-production of Dreamhaven Books and SF Minnesota, a multicultural speculative fiction organization that also hosts a midsummer convention, Diversicon, and this year it's July 27th through 29th. Guests of honor are Brian Telmora and Charlie Jean Anders, and we've got a musician guest, not a musician, an artist guest lined up too, but I'll remember the name next month. We're continuing to have these readings mostly on Wednesdays, once a month. Seminar guest. Oh, Tessa. Thank you. Oh, all right, then you don't need to do it again. And we don't have a reader for next month yet, but we have a date. It's going to be March 21st, and we'll get you the reader as soon as we have one. Tonight we're honored to have Michael Merriam. This is about your fifth time, something like that? Seventh time?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael Merriam, author, anthology editor, novelist and short story writer, lots of things. Take it away, Michael.
So as some of you may heard, this evening has not gone off without a hitch. On the way here, we got rear-ended pretty badly. So I think my wife has a piece of the bumper as part of our giveaway tonight.
It's up there somewhere. It was on the table. Yeah.
So if you'd like to put your name in to win a piece of our broken car bumper.
Yeah. You know we love you because we should be at urgent care right now.
That's right. Probably really should be. We actually do have a legitimate giveaway besides the car bumper. As some of you who follow me on social media may know, there was an incident with water and books. And water and books don't mix, as we have long discovered. And I managed to save most of them because I lived with a librarian who had the great sense to say, throw them in the freezer! But not all the books survived. And so I have this set. They are damaged, but they are readable. None of the pages are stuck together. So that is, must be a little, but that is tonight's giveaway. If you would like to put in to win these books, these two, and these two, put your name on this, and then it's, when we are done, I will get a random number, depending on how many people have signed up, and I will give you 4 books, slightly damaged, for free. And then I'll write them up on the taxes, because that's the way I am.
Why the heck not?
Why the heck not? Also, unfortunately, we thought we were going to have copies of the new thing, which is Not Enough Midnights. I have exactly 1 copy, because through a series of unfortunate events that have nothing to do with being rear-ended, they didn't actually get here. So I have 1 copy I can sell you. I think that if you do want them, though, do we have an order form?
Oh, we do.
We do.
Those are the things yesterday.
Yay! So if you want one, after hearing me read from it, we can set you up with an order form. Also,
Everything printed sideways for some reason.
that's fine, whatever. It'll be great. And you know, if you don't want to order one, but you want to buy one,
It's been a day.
then you can take this with you. It'll tell you where you can buy it. Also, for this particular thing, reading incident, the MinSpec anthologies are on sale. So if you want to buy all 3 of them, I'll give you $5 off, which is Northern Lights, Sky Tenant Waters, and Bipolaris Bright. Did I get it right? Did I get it right?
Yeah, it's right there.
No, I can't see them. And so if you're interested in those are the MinSpec anthologies, Minnesota Speculative Fiction Writers. So you get kind of a survey of local science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers by picking those up. So then I'm going to read to you a little bit from Midnights, and then I've got a couple of other things we'll do, and we'll do a Q&A, and you guys can eat some cookies, and then I'm probably going to skip the after thing, sadly. So, but this is from Not Enough Midnights, which is book 2 in the 6 Gun and Sorcery series, Cold Springs, Horror Cold Springs, is book 1. It had to be a snake, Blinchie said. I hate snakes. A snake god, Lady Priscilla pointed out. She gave Blinchie a small smile as we rode through the darkness toward Crying Woman Mound. I would have thought she'd want to stay a wolf for this, but she had simply shrugged when I asked. Blinchie told me as we waited that Priscilla and waited for Priscilla and her maid to finish at the hotel, that the longer she stayed in her wolf skin, the harder it was for her to transition back. I could hear the worry in his voice, the worry that someday the pull of the wild creature would become too strong. The call to stay a wolf would overwhelm her human mind, and Lady Priscilla Talbot would vanish. "All right then, a terrible big snake," Blinchy finally muttered. I chuckled despite our situation. "Good to see you still have a sense of humor, Bill." He gave me a dark look, and all I could do was smile in return. I didn't completely understand, but being back in the saddle, under the stars, I felt alive. And if there was a monster or a snake god waiting for us at this mound, then I hoped the rifle I carried would be useful. Trevor Halfmoon had explained the legend of the winged snake god, a creature the native peoples of this land had worked to appease and contain for so long that truth and myth were indistinguishable. The harvest time drumming was part of the ritual, but had apparently been disrupted by the local cavalry. Lady Priscilla spoke softly of other ancient snake gods as we rode, though where she had managed to learn all this lore or keep it straight in her head was beyond me. Snake god myths were common enough, she said, from malevolent Set of the Egyptians to winged Quetzalcoatl, who had been worshipped for centuries in lands not far from here. There were rumors of an even darker serpent deity, one that moved between worlds, manifested in much the manner Half Moon described, a giant monster, snake-like in a human body, with wings and 2 legs and sharp claws on the ends of hands the size of dinner plates, and fangs dripping with venom. It was the kind of stuff that caused nightmares, except I'd been having those for 2 years now, since Cold Springs. At the moment, I was more worried about the riders who had been tracking us since we had left Crying Woman Mound earlier in the evening. They always stayed just too far away for me to get a good look at them, but for a moment I thought one might have been the crazy man preaching end times when I arrived in Bangor. One thing was for sure, they wanted us to know that we were being watched. I glanced toward the last position they had been at, but no one was in sight now. Maybe the encroaching darkness had sent them scurrying back to their homes. I could hope. "It just stops," Blinchy said, disbelief played in his voice. He was staring at the side of the mound where Lady Priscilla had found the end of the giant snake lizard god's tracks after the cavalry had ridden away. "You always act surprised. I told you it ended there." Priscilla's voice had a note of annoyance, one Blinchy was quick to pick up. "Sorry, darling. I know you're good at what you do, and I know you said the trail ended right in the middle of the hill, but seeing it for myself..." He shook his head. "You think nothing much would surprise me anymore, but still..." "You sure it didn't climb into the top?" I asked. "No," Blinchy and Priscilla said together. They shared a quick smile before she took over the conversation. "It appears to have walked into the side of the hill." "Magic," Violet muttered, the word sounding like a curse falling from her lips. And perhaps it was. Always the magic. "What do you think about setting up camp over on that patch of flat ground between the trees? We'd be able to watch the hill," Blinchy said. "And then move in the middle of the night and cold camp over inside that stand of oaks about 50 yards on?" I gestured to the spot. Blinchy nodded. "I like it. We'd be able to keep an eye on the hill and catch anyone approaching the old camp with a little luck." "I don't much believe in luck," I told him. Blinchy chuckled. "I found I trust it more these days." He took his pack and bedroll from the saddle. "Priscilla and I will set up the warm camp and get the food started, if that's okay with you." Violet and I took care of the animals, unsaddling them, checking the bags, legs, mouths, and hooves, rubbing them down and brushing them before sitting them in a picket with feed brought from Bangor and carried for the overnight trip. We planned to have the animals back in stable by midday tomorrow. Violet and I carried our rifles back to the temporary camp and settled on the ground. We heated the meal brought from the hotel eatery over the small fire. Blinchy made strong black coffee and leaned back to read from a battered copy of Dumas by the light of the flames. It was enough to lull a man into complacency. It is a testament to the life my friends must live that they all managed to vanish into the darkness at the first crack of the rifle and smash of a bullet into the tin cup I had just set aside. I was a little slower, but changed positions before the second shot, moving away from the light and putting a tree between me and where I guessed the shooter to be. I blinked a few times to help my eyes adjust. To my left, I heard soft footfalls fade into the night. There was a low growl. "You all right?" Blinchy whispered. "Yep, except for my pride." I worked the bolt action on the new rifle. The weapon gave a soft whine as I watched the darkness for movement or muzzle flashes. "I must be getting old, Bill. I knew we were in enemy territory, but I let my damn guard down. We should have started with the cold camp. I should have known they'd try to ambush us right off." We both thought they'd come and try us after we'd bunked down for the night. Priscilla went to scout. Violet's about 20 yards away up in that tree. Our unseen attackers fired into the camp again, kicking up dirt near the coffee pot and knocking it over. To the left came the roar of Violet using her Turkish Mauser, the heavy infantry rifle, spitting fire into the night and lighting up the tree she was in. I heard swearing from where I'd seen the muzzle flash on the hill and wondered if she'd scored a hit in the darkness. There was a high, wild howling that made the hair on my arms and neck stand up. Even as a part of my brain reasoned it must be Lady Priscilla, another more primitive part of me wanted to flee. The horses, which had been relatively quiet until now, except for some soft nickering and stomping, snorted and pulled at the picket line, the mule leading off an alarmed bray. Hoofbeats retreated down the hill, heading away. I let out a relieved sigh, relaxed the tiniest bit. Lady Priscilla, in her wolf skin, came running into view, low to the ground, mouth open, teeth gleaming. Behind her, the hill slithered toward us. The horses, Blinchy cried out. I broke cover and ran after him. Lady Priscilla stopped near the fire and turned, head low and growling, snapping at a pair of snakes. I heard Violet jump down from the tree. Blinchy beat me to the animals, all of them panicked and nearly impossible to control. Another warning growl came from Lady Priscilla as the first wave of snakes overran the camp. Violet pulled a flaming brand from the campfire, waving it to protect her lady. Blinchy smashed down with the butt of his Sharps rifle, using it like a club, but there were just too many of them. I gained control of the Mustang I'd ridden on and swung up bareback on the little horse as the others, eyes rolling in terror and nostrils flaring, ran into the night. Clutching the lead to the mule, who had kept his head better than the horses, I kicked my Mustang, making the poor beast jump toward the fire. Blinchy bodily flung Priscilla, naked, human, blood running down her leg, onto the back of the mule and climbed up after her, while still striking snakes with his rifle. Violet cried a word I did not understand, pointed wide-eyed at the hill. She shook off whatever fear or shock gripped her and, rifle slung over her shoulder, ran toward me. It was large, black, bat wings on its back. It lipped down, wings open as it glided, wicked talons on its hands, flexing in anticipation of rending its intended victims. Tossing the lead for the mule to Blinchy, I tightened my legs around the Mustang, lifted the rifle to my shoulder, and squeezed the trigger as Violet climbed on behind me. The Tesla rifle was similar in body to Violet's Mauser, her dark wooden stock, middle barrel mechanism, bolt action instead of the familiar lever of a Winchester. The box magazine did not have standard cartridges, but copper casings with a flat top of silver. When I asked Blinchy what it fired, he smiled and said I should just see for myself. We only had 20 rounds of ammunition, so I'd been loath to use it. Now seemed like an appropriate time. There was a soft popping noise, and the rifle gave no kick. The only physical sign I had fired the weapon was a small green glowing light that shot from the end of the barrel like a tiny star, streaking toward what I supposed was the snake god. I watched over the barrel as the light struck true, hitting the thing square in the chest. The entire area lit up in a wave of eerie green as the bullet of light exploded against the monster. I caught a glimpse of the thing as it threw back its shoulders and flapped its wings. Then the Mustang decided that he had damn well had enough and raced off into the night with me astride and hanging on for dear life. I laid myself flat, felt another warm body resting against my back, heard a woman's voice muttering invectives in a language I didn't understand. I glanced over my shoulder to find Violet hanging on. Good. It meant I didn't have to go back for her. I checked for pursuit from the monster and found none. I couldn't see Blinchy and Priscilla. I had to hope they were safe. In the distance, I heard the faint sound of drums. So yeah, these are steampunk weird western things. Midnights and Cold Springs fall into that genre, and then Alicorn and Cold Springs share a couple of characters, but Alicorn is more of a British spy thriller, steampunk spy thriller. So there we have that. So how are we doing? I'm sure we're doing great for time, aren't we? We're doing fantastic. Do you guys have any questions then before I read you something else? Anything? Ask me anything. Pretend we're on Reddit. Yeah.
What are you working on now?
What am I working on now? Well, I've got a two-novel duology that I'm about to start shopping around. I'm working on the synopsis for it. I just finished with a writing partner the script for a 15-minute play that is going to premiere in March the weekend of the 14th and 15th at Phoenix Theater for a thing called Planet Fest. Go see it if you can. I don't know about the other scripts, but the one that Fox and I wrote is kind of crazy wackiness. I hope they can find actors who can do physical comedy. God bless them. So that's a little bit my fault. I'm going to read to you from one of the things that I'm working on right now next. And then I'm also about to probably jump into writing my first full-length script. And it's an Arthurian retelling where, frankly, Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot sort themselves out and figure out, okay, yes, we can make this work. but there are still other forces arrayed against them. So we'll see how it goes. But we had talked about doing that for Gadfly's Theater Festival. Then I realized that it was going to be longer than 25 minutes, as Eli and I have talked about. She's back there nodding her head. So that's on my dock. I have been slowly but surely moving more and more toward writing for stage. Still writing, science fiction, fantasy, horror, retold fairy tales. Just the horribly ridiculous thing is that I have made more money the last couple of 3 years working in theater than I have working in publishing, which says something about the state of publishing. So that's what I'm working on. Anybody else?
Yes. So as for your things that are not scripts, who are you publishing with these days?
Well, I'm doing the steampunk series on my own right now. Because they're all, as you can tell by the thickness of these little books, they're all novella length, and sidle up to a publisher and say, so I got this novella I want to sell. And they just kind of look at you like, I want a 120,000 word doorstop. Can you write that? No. I tend to write, 40,000 word novellas. That's kind of my sweet spot and wheelhouse. I will be shopping the 2 novels that I'm working on, though, around to agents. I published with Carina Press, which is a Harlequin imprint. So we'll probably start there because they know who I am. And both my titles with them sold fairly well. So that's who I'm working with right now. We'll see how that goes. Anybody else? All right.
Nope.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the anthologies?
Which ones? The
Just in
MinSpec
general.
ones? So the MinSpec anthologies, I had the pleasure of being the editor on those. We, the Minnesota Speculative Fiction Writers, if you don't know, and there's several members here. A bunch of people just waved. What's the website, Conrad?
Meetup.com/minspec.
Right.
You can spell it either way, MNSPEC or MINNSPEC.
Yeah, you can just Google Minnesota Speculative Fiction Writers and they'll pop up.
You can just Google MinSpec and it'll pop up.
Yeah.
That's the first one.
Just search for awesome writers groups in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's an awesome
really
writers.
cool t-shirt.
Right, so you got a t-shirt.
Pistachio colors.
Yes, exactly.
We're very upscale now, we have a t-shirt. So we decided to do a thing. I had been working as an editor for Fantasy Magazine, which was a Sith-War professional magazine back when it still existed. And one of the missions of MinSpec is to help emerging authors kind of get their feet underneath them. And so we thought one of the great things to do was to have emerging authors who maybe haven't done it yet go through this submission process. And get an opportunity to get a publication credit and get paid a little bit of money. Not a ton of money. A very little bit of money. They were published through a small press, so that MinSpec did not have to form its own imprint, or I didn't have to use my micropress. And so there are stories, short stories, it's all short stories, by authors in there as well known locally as, say, Kelly Barnhill, who is a Newbery Award winner, to people who got their very first publication credit. Pat Sullivan, I think, was one of my firsties. And so there's no real theme to them. They're just kind of a mix of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, basically, for each book. we put out a call. I had a slush pile. I picked the 20 best stories. I wrote polite rejections for people who did not make it in, and then, at least for the first 2 books, I don't know if I did it again the third time, so it was probably pushing my luck. We did a meet with the editor, where I would sit down with the group and you could come talk to me, and I would talk to you about why your story didn't make it or why your story did, and what I was looking for, and that sort of thing. So they're a really good entry. I'm especially fond of all of them. The cover of Polaris is a little retina burning, but I'm also legally blind, so whatever.
It gets your attention.
I had a guy buy it at an event I was at. He's like, I don't even know what this is about. I just want it for the cover. My God, I just want it for the cover.
So is it the cause of your blindness?
It just burned my retinas right out. It really did. I can thank him intermittently for that. So that's what those are about. So they are a lot of fun. They are, unfortunately, I think, starting to go out of print. They've been in print for quite a while, and the publisher is moving on to other stuff. So
Why don't you read us another story?
okay. So this is the thing I'm working on right now. Some of you heard the first part of this maybe 3 years ago, because I'm working very slowly on this. Very, very slowly. This is like my in-between project, so when I'm not working on something else, this is the thing I pick up. The most powerful sorcerer in the western suburbs carried 13 Minnesota twin bobbleheads in her battered leather briefcase. The briefcase went with Maggie Thorstead everywhere she traveled. To her job as an auditor at the credit union, to the grocery store for milk and eggs, to a nearby lake where she would remove her shoes and socks, roll up the cuffs of her charcoal gray pants, and sit with her feet in the water, remembering her wife and summer days before the cancer and the wasting and the forgetting. There was once a time when she needed only 9, 1 for each player position. Though the purist in Maggie longed for those simpler days, the reality of the designated hitter and specialty players had changed the game since her mother's time. The magic evolved with the game, and 13 was as strong a number as 3 times 3, so she bowed grudgingly to progress, even if that progress made her shoulder and arm ache from the added weight. Each bobblehead was handmade by the sorcerer herself and was not a licensed product of Major League Baseball Properties Incorporated. Today, Maggie carried 1 for each player position, 1 for the designated hitter, which she had finally warmed to after the added punch of power had proved the difference in a dispute with a conjurer from St. Cloud. 1 utility infielder, 1 left-handed one-out specialist, and her closer. She hardly ever carried the long reliever anymore, because if you needed your long reliever, you'd already lost the game, or the duel, as the case may be. Maybe it would have been smarter to carry a setup man, but if you plan to live and die with specialized positions, then you might as well go all in. And where she traveled today, that seemed like the right choice. Sometimes you went with your instincts in the game. Maggie took another moment standing at the Metropolitan Home Plate Memorial in the Mall of America, ignoring both the chillfully screaming children who ran around her in a chaotic swirl about the park that dominated the center of the building, and the frustrated, overburdened parents and guardians desperately trying to keep the little darlings corralled, or at least within visual range. With a quick glance up to the red stadium seat mounted high above the water slide and a muttered, "In Harmon we trust," Maggie picked up her briefcase and walked out of the amusement park, through the mighty mecca of American commerce and down to the transit station. Settling on the train for the long ride to Minneapolis, Maggie rested the briefcase on the empty seat next to her. Her peers often wondered aloud why she didn't just carry a full 25-man roster, but then she would need another briefcase, or 1 twice as large and on wheels, and either way, she only had so much time and power to craft and imbue the bubbleheads, and frankly, at 70 years old, she didn't want to schlep a bag big enough to carry a full roster. If she couldn't get things done with her starters and a handful of subs, then she wasn't much of a sorcerer. They also questioned why the bobbleheads weren't created in the image of the Twins' greatest players, not understanding that the magic was wrapped up not in the individual, but in the platonic ideal of each position, which assisted her focus by using the archetypes of her subconscious understood. Also, creating images of players she had known and cheered for over the decades just seemed creepy. Closing her eyes and taking several deep breaths as the train glided out of the station and started the long turn north toward Minneapolis, Maggie asked for the intercession of St. Sebastian and St. Rita in her cause. She needed to make this pilgrimage to the site of 3 lost stadiums and 1 still standing: Metropolitan, the Metrodome, Target Field, and finally the site of the old Nicollet Baseball Park. But first, Maggie had to safely cross her territory. The Queen of the North Star would not care about a briefcase full of bobbleheads, or that Maggie was the most powerful sorcerer in the western suburbs. The Queen would only care that Maggie was trespassing in the heart of her domain after decades of banishment from all the Twin Cities professional baseball parks and stadiums, past or present. And it was a damn fool indeed who crossed a greater spirited place, which Maggie had done today by drawing power from the ghost of Metropolitan Stadium. Or maybe just a tired fool, Maggie thought. The gentle rocking and clacking of the wheels lulled her into a light doze as the train passed under the airport and gathered speed, hurtling toward the next station. The Queen of the North Star took another sip of her vodka martini and regarded her surroundings. Though she preferred winter white with snow and the comforting weight of deep cold, she knew how to make the best of summer as well. Today she held court in the Du Nord cocktail room, robed in her white flare dress, heels, and a hat that provided plenty of shade from the sun for at least one person, and possibly as many as 3 if they felt that way about each other. It was an outfit similar to the one she wore when visiting the Great Thoroughbred to watch his children run. Raising the martini glass to her lips, she glanced at her priests. The 3 women were dressed in much the same fashion as she, one each in green, red, and yellow. They were all good priests and solid sorcerers, skilled in magic most practical. Calling the snow, ice scrying, summoning the north wind, they could do all these and more when she called upon their power. What they weren't, what they could never be, was Maggie Thorstad. Taking a sip of her drink and settling the glass on the wooden table, she favored them with a small smile. It was unfair of her to compare them to Maggie. She knew this. There had been many priests and worshippers over the centuries since her birth. Some powerful, some wise, some so devout it made her heart ache to use them to their fullest extent. Many were none of these, just meddling sorcerers, tools too brittle for either subtle magics or mighty works, but perfect for simple day-to-day charms that cleared an icy sidewalk and kept the produce fresh and made the world run smoothly. The Queen of the North Star loved them all, no matter their greatness or lack of same. This was the truth. Maggie Thorstad came into the Queen's service as a 16-year-old, bright and eager to follow in her mother's footsteps. Maggie shared her mother's aptitude for magic, her devotion to her Queen, and her love of baseball. Bernadette Eklund played the game professionally for 1 season with the Minneapolis Millerettes during the struggle. Bernie, as her teammates called her, refused to leave Minneapolis and her Queen when the team owners packed up the balls and the bats and the women and moved the whole shebang to Florida, instead settling down with her maimed soldier-turned-shopkeeper beau to raise a family and become the Queen's high priest. Maggie was Bernadette's first child, pledged to the Queen's service at birth, destined to become the Queen's right hand, so powerful even as a teen that all knew she was fated to become one with the Queen upon her natural death. Maggie's magic, in essence, merging with the Queen of the North Star, giving the Queen stronger magic to defend herself from other spirits trying to wrest away her domain and essence, and a chance to move herself up the ever-shifting hierarchy of spirits a place. Losing Maggie as her priest diminished her. Losing the love and loyalty of her home blood-born daughter to Maggie had infuriated her. Losing Noel, her child who had lived for 200 years and should have lived 1,000 more, who bore the bloodlines of the Queen and the great river himself, who was her heir of something when the world finally became tiresome, to lose her so needlessly to the lords of death. The Queen of the North Star raised the martini glass to her lips and sipped. Maggie Thorstad was coming to her now, moving toward the Queen on steel rails. Maggie had already broken the vows of banishment and truce extracted in the days following Noel's defection by visiting the site of the former Metropolitan Baseball Stadium, by going there and calling up the ghost of the stadium haunting the big mall and drawing power from that ghost. Why would Noel set aside her powers in aspect? The Queen rolled the stem of the glass between her fingers and frowned. Why would she engage in such foolishness? Noel's death made no sense to the Queen. She had sworn to return after Maggie's natural life ended, and human lives were the barest blink to the Queen. She was willing to be patient with her daughter's folly, but now Noelle was forever dead, and Maggie Thorstad rode the train after choosing to break her banishment oaths. And none of this made sense to the Queen, at least not on the surface. Watching Maggie approach, the Queen reached out with her waning powers, formed a bubble of time, and held it close until the train carrying Maggie Thorstad entered the station nearest the cocktail lounge. She wrapped the bubble around the train, and she held it. She needed to understand. She needed to understand, and Maggie Thorstad knew the answer to her daughter's death. The Queen held the train and everything around it in stasis, giving Maggie the choice of either answering the implied summons or attempting to fight free. The Queen hoped it would be the former.